The arrow trembled against the bowstring as Kahanu crouched behind the weathered oak, his massive frame casting shadows that danced with the moonlight. Below him, the settler woman lay defenseless beside the dying embers of her campfire, her auburn hair spilled across a makeshift pillow of saddle leather. One shot. That's all it would take to avenge his fallen brother, to answer the blood debt that had haunted him for 3 moons. But something stayed his hand. Cordelia Whitmore stirred, in her sleep, murmuring words in the white man's tongue that sounded almost like a prayer. Her face, peaceful in slumber, bore none of the hardness he'd seen in the other settlers who'd carved through Apache lands. Like hungry wolves, a small leather-bound book lay open beside her, not a weapon, not a map of conquest, but something else entirely. The giant Apache warrior had tracked her wagon train for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When dysentery had claimed half her party and Indian raids had scattered the rest, she'd been left alone with nothing but a lame horse and dwindling supplies. She should have been easy prey, a simple target for his revenge. Instead, Kahanu found himself lowering his bow. He'd watched her tend to wounded animals along the trail, seen her leave portions of her meager food for the coyote pups that followed at a distance. When her horse had gone lame, she hadn't abandoned the creature as most settlers would, but had fashioned a poultice from prairie herbs with the skill of someone who understood the language of healing. The wind shifted, carrying her scent, not the harsh soap and gunpowder smell of most whites, but something softer, wildflowers and wood smoke, and beneath it all, the clean smell of someone who belonged to the earth rather than sought to conquer it. As dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of copper and gold, Cordelia woke to find her lame horse standing strong, its swollen leg wrapped in wet clay and healing moss. Her dwindling water supply had been replenished, and fresh rabbit meat hung from a nearby branch, still warm from the fire that had cooked it. She sat up slowly, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol at her side, but something in the morning air told her she was in no danger. The tracks around her camp were enormous, easily twice the size of any man she'd known, but they circled her sleeping area in a protective pattern, rather than closing in for an attack. On a flat stone beside her fire, someone had left a single eagle feather and a handful of purple wildflowers, the same wildflowers she'd been pressing in her journal, the same ones she'd admired in the meadows they'd passed through. Her breath caught in her throat as she spotted him, a towering figure, standing motionless on the ridge above, silhouetted against the morning sun like some ancient spirit of the mountains. Even at this distance, she could see the powerful breadth of his shoulders, the proud bearing that spoke of nobility rather than savagery. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the impossible distance that separated their worlds. Then, with fluid grace that seemed to defy his massive size, he melted back into the landscape like morning mist. Cordelia touched the eagle feather with trembling fingers, understanding with crystalline clarity that her life had just changed forever. 3 days later, Cordelia's situation had grown desperate. The trail to Fort Devlin stretched ahead like an impossible dream, and her supplies dwindled with each passing hour. She'd begun to accept that the wilderness would claim her, just as it had claimed so many others who'd dared to cross into this untamed land. But each morning brought new miracles. Fresh water appeared in her canteen. Wild berries, carefully selected and perfectly ripe, materialized beside her sleeping roll. Her campfires, which should have died in the night, burned steady and warm until dawn. Someone was caring for her with the devotion of a guardian angel, and she knew exactly who it was. Kahanu watched from concealment as she began leaving offerings of her own, sketches torn from her journal and weighted down with stones, pictures of the landscape around them, drawn with an artist's eye for beauty rather than a surveyor's hunger for possession. She left wildflower crowns woven with grass, small sculptures made from interesting stones, and once a piece of hardtack decorated with berry juice and patterns that reminded him of his grandmother's pottery. The white woman was trying to speak to him in the only language she knew, the language of gifts, of respect, of someone who saw beauty where others saw only resources to be claimed. On the 4th day, Kahanu made a decision that would have horrified his war band. He stepped into her camp while she collected firewood, moving with deliberate, noise so as not to startle her. When she returned, arms full of kindling, she froze at the sight of him. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his bronze skin marked with the scars of countless battles, his long black hair decorated with feathers and small bones that spoke of his warrior status. But his hands were empty of weapons, and his dark eyes held an expression she hadn't expected: curiosity, and something that might have been loneliness. I know you've been helping me," Cordelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She set down the firewood with careful movements, as if any sudden motion might shatter this impossible moment. "I wanted to thank you." Kahanu tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a hawk. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear, learned from the missionaries who'd tried to convert his people before the wars began. "You should fear me, white woman. Your people killed my brother, burned our sacred places. Why do you not run?" Cordelia met his gaze steadily, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Because you could have killed me a dozen times over, and instead you've kept me alive. That tells me more about who you are than any of the stories I've heard." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor of hostility he'd worn for so long. "Stories lie. Your people tell stories about mine that we are demons, animals. What stories do they tell about you?" She smiled sadly. "That I'm a foolish woman who should have stayed home and married the banker's son instead of trying to reach my sister in California. That I'm too headstrong, too curious, too much," he repeated, as if tasting the words. "My people would say you are exactly enough." They stood in silence for a long moment, two worlds balancing on the edge of understanding. Then Cordelia did something that took more courage than facing down a charging buffalo. She stepped closer. "My name is Cordelia," she said, extending her hand in the white custom of greeting. Kahanu stared at the offered hand, then at her face, reading the genuine courage there. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her small hand in his massive one. "Kahanu," he said simply. "It means the one who stands apart." "Well, Kahanu," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I think we're both standing apart from our worlds right now. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. For the first time in 3 years, since the day his brother died in the white man's war." Kahanu smiled. The weeks that followed blurred together like a dream painted in earth tones and golden sunlight. Kahanu taught Cordelia to read the land's secret language, which plants would heal and which would harm, how to find water by watching the flight of birds, the way morning shadows could reveal hidden dangers. In return, she shared the treasures from her saddlebags, books filled with poetry that made him see familiar landscapes through new eyes, sketches that captured not just the appearance of things, but their spirit. "Your people fear the desert," Kahanu said one evening as they sat beside their shared fire. "But you draw it like a lover." Cordelia blushed at the comparison, her fingers tracing the edge of her latest sketch, a study of his hands as he carved. "A whistle from River Cane. I've never seen anything so beautiful. The way the light moves across the mesas, the colors that exist nowhere else on earth. How could anyone see this as wasteland? Because they do not know how to listen," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "The stones tell stories older than memory. The wind carries the voices of our ancestors. But your people hear only silence, so they fill it with noise." Their conversations had grown deeper, more intimate, as natural barriers crumbled like sand. Castles before the tide. He told her about his childhood, racing wild horses across the endless plains, learning the old ways from his grandmother who could speak to spirits. She shared her own loneliness, the suffocating expectations of Eastern society, the desperate hunger for adventure that had driven her west against all advice. "I was supposed to marry Pemberton Ashworth," she confessed one night, stars wheeling overhead like scattered diamonds. 42 years old, owned 3 textile mills, and had the personality of wet cardboard. "Mother said I was lucky he'd have me at 26, practically a spinster by their standards." Kahanu made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your mother would hate me more than this Pemberton. My mother has never seen you gentle a wild Mustang with nothing but patience and grain," Cordelia replied. "She's never watched you save a baby hawk that fell from its nest, or seen the way you mourn for trees that white men cut down for no reason." She doesn't know that you're the most honorable man I've ever met." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Kahanu turned to study her face in the firelight, seeing there an honesty that cut through all the careful walls he'd constructed around his heart. "Your people and mine are at war, Cordelia," he said quietly. "There is no place in either world for what grows between us." "Then maybe we need to create our own world," she whispered, the words barely audible above the crackling flames. The next morning brought harsh reality crashing back into their refuge. Kahanu's keen hearing picked up the sound of approaching riders while they were still miles away. The heavy hoofbeats of cavalry horses, the jingle of spurs and sabers that meant soldiers were coming. "They track you," he said, his warrior instincts taking over. "White woman alone along in Apache country. They come to rescue you." Cordelia's face went pale. She knew what rescue meant, questions she couldn't answer, assumptions about what had happened to her during her weeks of disappearance, forced return to a world that would never understand what she'd found in the wilderness. "I don't want to be rescued," she said fiercely. "I want to stay with you." Kahanu's heart clenched at the desperate hope in her voice, but he was too much a realist to indulge in impossible dreams. "They will hang me, kill my people, say I stole you. You must go back to your world, live the life you were meant to live." "And what if I don't want that life anymore?" she demanded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What if I've found something here worth more than all their safety and respectability?" He cupped her face in his large hands, memorizing every detail, the spray of freckles across her nose, the way her eyes sparked when she was passionate about something, the stubborn set of her chin that had probably driven her mother to distraction. Then, "You are braver than any warrior I have known," he said softly. "But bravery alone cannot change the world, little wildflower. Sometimes it can only help us survive what we cannot change." The sound of hoofbeats grew closer, and with it, the death of dreams neither of them had dared fully voice. Captain Lysander Holt expected to find a traumatized woman, possibly dead, certainly broken by months of captivity among savages. What he discovered instead defied every assumption he'd carried into Apache territory. Cordelia Whitmore stood beside a towering Apache warrior like a queen beside her chosen knight. Her clothes were travel-worn but clean, her hair braided with wildflowers in a style he'd never seen among civilized women. Most shocking of all, she showed no signs of fear or abuse. Instead, she radiated a vitality that made the desert itself seem more alive. "Miss Whitmore," Captain Holt called, his hand resting on his saber hilt. "Thank God we've found you. Step away from that savage, and we'll escort you to safety." "I am perfectly safe, Captain," Cordelia replied, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "And this man is no savage. He's the finest gentleman I've ever had the honor to meet." The soldiers exchanged incredulous glances. Clearly the woman had lost her mind, probably from the trauma of captivity. Several raised their rifles, aiming at Kahanu, who stood motionless as carved stone. "Don't you dare!" Cordelia stepped directly into their line of fire, arms spread wide to shield the Apache warrior. "This man saved my life repeatedly. He's shown me nothing but kindness and respect. If you harm him, you'll have to go through me first." Captain Holt's weathered face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Miss Whitmore, you're clearly not thinking clearly. This heathen has obviously bewitched you somehow. We're here to bring you home to your family." "My family?" Cordelia laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "My family, who saw me as nothing more than a bargaining chip in their social climbing, who would have married me off to the highest bidder without a thought for my happiness. That family." Kahanu watched the confrontation with growing tension. He could kill half these soldiers before they knew what hit them, but that would only prove their prejudices right and doom Cordelia to a life of shame and suspicion. There had to be another way, some solution that honored both worlds without destroying either. Then Cordelia did something that stunned everyone present, including Kahanu. She dropped to one knee in the dust, looked up at the giant Apache warrior, and spoke words that would echo through territorial legend for generations to come. "Kahanu of the Kirikahua Apache," she said, her voice ringing clear across the desert morning. "I ask you to be my husband, not by white law or Apache custom, but by the laws of the heart that recognize no boundaries, save those we choose to accept. The silence that followed was so complete that even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Captain Holt's jaw worked soundlessly, his face cycling through shades of red that would have been amusing under different circumstances. The soldiers looked like men who'd just witnessed the impossible, which, in many ways, they had. Kahanu stared down at this extraordinary woman who'd just shattered every convention of both their societies with a dozen simple words. In Apache culture, women did not propose marriage, but then again, Cordelia had never been bound by any culture's limitations. "You know what you ask," he said quietly, his voice carrying to every listener. "You would be cast out from your people, called worse than dead. I would be hunted by mine for taking a white wife. We would belong nowhere, accepted by no one." Cordelia rose gracefully, dust motes dancing around her like golden stars. "Then we'll make our own place," she said simply, "far from anyone who would judge us, in country so wild and beautiful that we'll need no company but each other and the spirits that dwell in sacred places." She turned to face Captain Holt and his men, her chin raised defiantly. "I hereby renounce any claim to my family's name or fortune. I choose exile rather than return to a world that would make me less than I am. Mark it in your report. Captain Cordelia Whitmore died in the desert, but someone better was born here." Kahanu felt something ancient and powerful stir in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than love, deeper than desire, into the realm where souls recognize their true mates, across all barriers of birth and circumstance. "Then I accept," he said, his voice rolling across the desert like thunder. "By the spirits of my ancestors and the courage of your heart, I take you as my wife." Woman who chooses her own path. He lifted her easily in his massive arms, and she laughed with pure joy as he spun her round beneath the endless sky. When he set her down, they were no longer Cordelia and Kahanu, but something entirely new, a union that would reshape both their destinies. Captain Holt finally found his voice. "This is madness. You can't just. People don't just. People do exactly what we choose to do." Cordelia replied serenely, "And I choose love over fear, adventure over safety, and truth over the comfortable lies that keep us apart." Word of the impossible union spread across the territory like wildfire, carrying with it a mixture of outrage, fascination, and something that might have been hope. In the settlement of Esperanza, women whispered behind their fans about the Eastern lady who'd chosen love over respectability. Around Apache fires, warriors debated whether Kahanu had brought honor or shame upon their people by taking a white wife. But in the hidden canyon where the couple had made their temporary home, such concerns seemed as distant as stars. Cordelia and Kahanu were discovering what it meant to build a life from nothing but love and determination. "We need a real ceremony," Cordelia announced one morning as she worked to transform their cave dwelling into something resembling a home, something that honors both our traditions without being bound by either. Kahanu looked up from the arrowheads he was crafting, considering her words. "Apache weddings require the blessing of the tribe. Your people need churches and preachers. We have neither. Then we'll create our own," she said with the fierce determination that had first drawn him to her. "Under the open sky, with the mountains as our witnesses and the wind as our priest." For 3 days, they prepared. Cordelia wove a dress from soft deerskin that Kahanu had tanned, decorating it with porcupine quills dyed in the colors of sunset. Kahanu crafted a ceremonial shirt from the hide of a elk he'd hunted, adding symbols that told the story of their meeting: the eagle for his first sight of her, the wildflower for her gentle nature, the star for the hope she'd brought to his darkness. On the morning of their chosen day, unexpected guests arrived. Ayana, Kahanu's sister, emerged from the canyon shadows leading a small group of Apache women, their faces painted for ceremony. "My brother chooses strangely," she said in accented English, studying Cordelia with sharp eyes. "But the spirits told me in dreams that this union serves a purpose greater than our understanding. We come to witness." Before Cordelia could respond, another voice called from the canyon entrance. "As do we," announced Reverend Tobias Crane, a circuit preacher known for his unconventional interpretations of Scripture. Behind him came an unlikely procession, several women from Esperanza, including the doctor's wife and the schoolteacher, all carrying baskets of food and flowers. "Word reached us," explained Mrs. Crane, a tiny woman with steel in her spine. "Some called it scandal, but I called it the first sensible thing I've heard in this godforsaken territory. Love is love, and I've yet to see much harm come from too much of it." Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes as she realized what was happening. People from both worlds, risking social censure and physical danger, had come to support a union that defied every boundary their societies held sacred. The ceremony began at sunset, when the canyon walls glowed like the inside of a jewel. Reverend Crane spoke of love that transcended human divisions, while Ayanna burned sage and called upon Apache spirits to bless the union. Cordelia and Kahanu stood hand in hand as words in English and Apache mingled in the evening air, creating something entirely new, a marriage that belonged to no single tradition, but honored the best of both. "By the authority invested in me by conscience rather than convention," Reverend Crane concluded, "and by the ancient power of the spirits that move through all living things, I pronounce you husband and wife in the eyes of God and nature." Kahanu lifted Cordelia's hands to his lips, then spoke in Apache words that made his sister smile. "He says," Ayanna translated, "that you are the sunrise that ended his long night, the rain that brought life to his desert heart." Cordelia responded in halting Apache that she'd been practicing in secret, her pronunciation making several women giggle. But the meaning came through clearly. "You are my mountain, my shelter, my home in all the wild places of the world." As night fell and the celebration continued around fires that cast dancing shadows on stone walls, the newlyweds slipped away to a ledge overlooking their canyon. The stars wheeled overhead in patterns that seemed to tell the story of their love, impossible, magnificent, and written in the very fabric of the universe. "No regrets?" Kahanu asked, pulling his wife close against the desert chill. Cordelia smiled, thinking of the life she'd left behind, the suffocating parlors and endless social obligations, the future that had been planned for her without her input or consent. Then she looked at the wild beauty spread before them, felt the strength of the man beside her, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, only one. She whispered against his ear, "That it took me so long to find you." Their laughter echoed off the canyon walls, mixing with the night songs of coyotes and the whisper of wind through stone, creating a music that spoke of love triumphant over all the forces that would divide and diminish the human heart. Their first year of marriage tested them in ways neither had anticipated. Winter came early and harsh, trapping them in their canyon for weeks at a time. The isolation that had seemed romantic in autumn became a grinding challenge as supplies dwindled and temperatures plummeted. But hardship had a way of revealing the true strength of their bond. Cordelia learned to trap rabbits and tan hides, her soft eastern hands growing calloused and capable. Kahanu discovered that his wife's education extended far beyond drawing and poetry. She could calculate precise measurements for construction projects, navigate by the stars, and had memorized enough medical knowledge from her father's library to serve as the canyon's only doctor when he fell ill with pneumonia. "You never told me your father was a physician," he gasped between coughing fits, as she applied poultices to his chest with professional competence. "You never asked," she replied with a smile that didn't quite hide her worry. "I may have been raised to be ornamental, but I was too curious to leave it at that. I read everything in his library: anatomy, surgery, pharmacy." Mother was horrified. By spring, they had survived their trial by ice and emerged stronger. Word of their success spread through both communities with the inexorable power of legend. The Apache spoke of Kahanu who chose love, and his white wife who could heal with her hands. The settlers whispered of the eastern lady who'd tamed a savage warrior, and somehow made him more noble in the process. The truth, as always, was more complex and beautiful than either version. "We need to think about the future," Cordelia said one morning as they worked together to expand their garden. "Not just surviving, but building something that will last." Kahanu paused in his digging, studying her face. "You speak of children." "I speak of hope," she corrected gently. "Children, yes, if we're blessed. but also something bigger. A place where people like us can come, mixed couples, outcasts, anyone who doesn't fit the narrow definitions of either world. The idea took root like seeds in fertile ground. Over the following months, they began to see their isolated canyon differently, not as a hiding place, but as a foundation. Other mixed couples began to find their way to the hidden valley, guided by rumors and desperate hope. Marcus, a former slave who'd married a Mexican woman, running bear, an Apache warrior whose white captive wife had chosen to stay with him. Chen Lu, a Chinese immigrant whose Navajo bride had been cast out by both families. Each new rival brought skills and stories, strengths and sorrows. Cordelia found herself serving as mediator, translator, and unofficial mayor of their growing community. Kahanu became their protector and guide, teaching survival skills to city-bred refugees while learning new trades from those who'd been craftsmen in other lives. "You're building something remarkable here," Reverend Crane observed during one of his periodic visits. "A community based on acceptance rather than exclusion. It's the closest thing to Christian charity I've seen in 30 years of preaching." But their success couldn't remain secret forever. By midsummer, word had reached the territorial capital that a mixed-race settlement was thriving in Apache country. Some called it an abomination, others a dangerous precedent. Military advisors warned that it could inspire other outcasts to rebel against social order. Governor Wallace arrived unannounced one blazing July morning, accompanied by a full company of cavalry and a collection of territorial officials who looked like they'd been sucking lemons. Cordelia met them at the canyon entrance, her bearing so regal that several soldiers instinctively touched their hat brims. "Miss Whitmore," the governor began, then caught himself. "Mrs., what exactly are we to call you now?" "Mrs. Kahanu will do," she replied calmly, "or simply Cordelia, if you prefer informality." Governor Wallace was a politician to his bones, capable of adapting his approach to any situation. But this a refined Eastern lady who'd apparently gone native, without losing any of her natural authority, was outside his experience. "I'm here to discuss your situation," he said carefully. "The territorial government is concerned about the precedent you're setting, the implications for law and order, the implication that people of different backgrounds can live together in peace." Cordelia asked with dangerous sweetness. "How terrifying that must be for those who profit from division." Kahanu appeared beside her as if materializing from the stone itself, and Governor Wallace took an involuntary step backward. The Apache warrior was even larger than reports had suggested. But what unnerved the politician wasn't his size. It was the obvious intelligence in his dark eyes, the bearing that spoke of natural leadership rather than savage brutality. "Governor," Kahanu said in English only slightly accented, "you are welcome in our home if you come in peace. If you come to make war on people who have harmed no one, you will find us harder to move than these mountains." The challenge hung in the desert air like heat shimmer, while behind the couple, other residents of their impossible community emerged from the shadows. A dozen adults, 3 mixed-race children, all watching the confrontation with the quiet intensity of people who'd found something worth defending. Governor Wallace realized he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just his political career, but the future of the territory itself. Governor Wallace was a man who'd built his career on pragmatism rather than idealism, but sometimes practical politics and moral courage pointed in the same direction. Looking at the faces arrayed before him, determined, hopeful, unified despite their diverse backgrounds, he made a decision that would reshape territorial policy for generations. "Mrs. Kahanu," he said formally, his voice carrying across the canyon like a pronouncement of history, "I hereby grant official territorial recognition to your settlement. You'll be known as Haven Valley, and you'll have the same rights and protections as any incorporated town in the territory." The silence that followed was so complete that a hawk's cry from the canyon rim sounded like thunder. Then Cordelia stepped forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Governor, you understand what this means. Mixed-race marriages will be legally protected here. Outcasts from both societies will have somewhere to build new lives. You're creating a precedent that will ripple far beyond these canyon walls." "I'm creating a solution," he replied firmly. "We can spend the next decade fighting guerrilla wars over social integration, or we can allow places like this to serve as pressure valves. Let those who can't or won't fit into traditional society build something new. Judge them by their success, not their bloodlines. Kahanu studied the politician with new respect. You risk much for people you barely know, Governor. Wallace smiled wryly. I risk much more by allowing the territory to tear itself apart over prejudices. That helped no one. Besides, he added, looking around at the thriving gardens, well-built homes, and obvious prosperity of the settlement, you've proven something can work here. My job is to govern, not to impose my personal preferences on other people's happiness. The official recognition changed everything. Within months, Haven Valley grew from a hidden refuge to a destination. Interracial couples arrived regularly, along with others who'd been cast out by conventional society, former outlaws seeking redemption, women fleeing, abusive marriages, men whose unconventional ideas had made them unwelcome in more traditional communities. Cordelia established a school where children learned Apache tracking skills, alongside classical literature, where Chinese brush painting was taught next to European mathematics. Kahanu organized hunting parties that included former cavalry officers and Apache warriors, watching with satisfaction as old enemies learned to respect each other's skills. We're not just building a town, Cordelia observed one evening as she and her husband sat on their favorite overlook, watching the lights of their community twinkle in the gathering dusk. We're proving that the best of both worlds can coexist, without either being diminished. Their first child arrived in the spring of their third year, a daughter with her mother's green eyes and her father's strong bones, who seemed equally at home with Apache lullabies and English nursery rhymes. They named her Ayanna Esperanza, eternal blossom in Apache, hope in Spanish, a name that reflected both their heritage and their dreams. As word of Haven Valley spread beyond territorial borders, visitors came from as far as California and New York. Some came out of curiosity, others seeking solutions to their own community's racial tensions. A few came to criticize or condemn, but most left with a new understanding of what America could become if its people chose cooperation over conflict. Reverend Crane performed dozens of mixed-race weddings in the canyon's natural amphitheater, each ceremony adding another thread to the tapestry of their impossible community. The Apache elders who'd initially condemned Kahanu's choice gradually began to see wisdom in the alliance. Their young men learned new skills. Their traditions found respect among unlikely students, and the old ways survived through adaptation, rather than rigid isolation. Years passed like pages in a beloved book, each one adding depth and richness to their story. Cordelia's hair gained threads of silver. Kahanu's face earned new lines, from laughter as much as from sun and wind. Their daughter grew into a young woman who could negotiate peace between feuding neighbors in 3 languages, who rode like a Comanche and painted like an artist trained in Paris. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken that shot? Cordelia asked one evening, 20 years after their first meeting. They were watching their grandson Ayanna's boy learn to use a bow under his grandfather's patient instruction. Kahanu was quiet for so long that she thought he hadn't heard. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through decades of love and struggle. I think the spirits knew, he said finally, knew that some things are too precious to destroy, even in the name of justice or revenge. That warrior who aimed his arrow at a sleeping woman died the moment I chose to lower my bow. What was born in his place was something I never expected to become, a man worthy of your love. Cordelia leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm, as the canyon stone that had sheltered them through so many seasons. Round them, the sounds of their community drifted on the evening air, children playing games that mixed Apache and settler traditions, adults discussing the day's work in a mixture of languages, the soft strumming of a guitar playing melodies that belonged to no single culture, but to all of them. Come with me, Kahanu said suddenly, rising and extending his hand with the same gallant gesture he'd used to help her from her horse 2 decades ago. Where are we going? She laughed, taking his hand as naturally as breathing. Everywhere, he replied, pulling her to her feet and spinning her round as he had on their wedding day. Nowhere. Does it matter? We go together. And as the stars emerged one by one in the vast desert sky, painting silver patterns across the heavens above Haven Valley. Two souls who'd found each other across impossible distances danced to the music of their own choosing, surrounded by the living proof that love, given enough courage and time, really could change the world. Their story became legend, passed down through generations of children who learned that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't hatred or fear, but the simple, radical act of choosing love over the lies that keep hearts apart. In Haven Valley, where the desert bloomed with impossible flowers and the wind carried songs of unity instead of war, that lesson lived on, a testament to what could happen when two people dared to believe that coming together was always stronger than standing apart.